This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Patrick Gullo.
I'm David McDonald.
And I'm Sam Merciers.
And joining us this week is our guest, John Supko. He is the Hunt Family Assistant Professor of Music at Duke University, where he co-directs Duke's Emergence Lab, dedicated to, and I quote, creation of generative works of art that include many different media elements and processes. He has a new CD coming out on Cotton Goods Records, S Straits, on November 4th, which is a collaboration with Bill Seaman. John, thanks for being on the show today.
Great to be here, so to speak.
Now, I would say that...
we appreciate that you've traveled so far to be with us.
Well, anything for you.
Yeah. What I was saying is, something, intermedia is something that we talk a lot about on this show. It's something that we're all interested in. I'd say especially Sam and Dave. I'm interested in how you initially got involved with music and other elements and combining them together.
Oh, so you mean like combining, say, field recordings and notated pitches and that sort of thing, and text? Yeah. Well, I guess I gradually became interested in the experience of listening to a piece of music that also had surprising or unusual elements involved that created an experience that was ambiguous. So it was not something, so for example, if I use a text, I'm not trying to make a melodrama or a sort of an enhanced book on tape or something like that. What I'm looking for is an experience that is somehow in between the experience of hearing a text read and listening to a piece of music. So I'm almost using the text or the field recording, if the piece uses a field recording, as another aesthetic element, a packet of information that I want the listener to digest in some unpredictable way.
Yeah, I like that, because if you give text, even if the text has no clear meaning, or like you don't give enough text to render a very clear like narrative structure or a description of something, people still try to start piecing it together that way.
Yeah.
And then playing their musical brain versus their literal text reading brain, to me, is an interesting space to have to deal with in the listener's mind.
Well, it's where the magical things in the arts happen, I think. I often like to repeat something I heard the photographer Sally Mann say, that if you don't have ambiguity, what's the point? So, when you fragment a text or you fragment a recording or you give multiple fragments, the potential for each individual listener in the audience to make their own narrative that's personally meaningful based on their past experiences, the references that they read into it, their mishearings, their misinterpretations. They're creative also. So I think that's really fascinating.
So are you the kind of person who's okay with leaving off metronome markings?
That's an interesting question. There's certain details that I'm very happy to let the performers decide. Tempo hasn't generally been one of them.
So you're not like 120 beats per minute-ish kind of person.
Oh, right. Well, I mean, I do. What I do like is using what I call clock time. Just it's kind of the most boring metronome marking, 60 BPM, but I find there's something interesting about the idea of replacing clock time with art time or aesthetic time. But I've never written a piece where the tempo was up to the player's discretion.
Although the players often think that it is, no matter what you say.
That's right. Well, I had one particular instance where I wrote this piece that had that had a sampler part, and the samples I used samples that were locked into a particular metronome marking. I think it was quarter note equals 56. And when I went to the rehearsal, the conductor was doing it something like 112, or not even. It wasn't even cleanly twice as fast. It was something in the middle, and it didn't work with the samples. So from that point forward, I think I always put strict metronome marking if I used the sampler part.
Right.
because it makes a difference.
Absolutely.
So where do you get your samples from? We're gonna listen to a little bit of a clip or several clips of your music today, and the samples strike me as coming from. Well, I can't imagine how some of these things would be captured. Are you bringing people in to create these spoken words, or are you just finding these recordings existing in the world somewhere that somebody else has made?
Well, in almost all the cases, they're recordings that I made, but in terms of who's speaking, changes from piece to piece. So the piece, This Window Makes Me Feel, I recorded an old friend of mine reading a text that she had never seen before, and I wanted her to read it cold, and we read it outside on a windy, cold day, and I had her whisper it, and it was important to me that she had never read it before because it communicated a kind of fragility to her reading that I think it communicated something emotional about the text. It's a very private text, This Window Makes Me Feel, the poem by Robert Fitterman. So I thought that if I gave it to her to read or to whisper cold, that would somehow enhance the delivery of the text.
When you choose a text, do you invent the text yourself, or do you draw them from literature in some way? Because go ahead.
Well, both. I love using text by writers that I either know personally or respect. Lately, the last couple of years, I've been generating my own text with Markov chain processes. So that's kind of fun because you get to decide the DNA, the literary DNA of the text that you want to make. So, for example,
Where do you go for those sources of your Markov generators?
The Gutenberg Project website, because they're all public domain text, so I can't get in trouble.
Yeah. Well, to me, I've used texts, probably not in the same application or as extensively, but like for instance, if for example I have a percussion ensemble piece and the transition is cued by different percussionists start reciting a text and they start overlapping each other.
Right.
And some of them are innocuous little things no one would know, but some of them are like literature things or Tom York, quotes or DJ Shadow quotes. And what's interesting to me is there might be one person who knows that quote. And if they hear that, the cognitive experience becomes something totally different for them than for everybody else that doesn't know. It's just a bunch of words.
But even if people didn't know the text, that they could, invent a meaning that was somehow meaningful for themselves. I mean, humans are looking for these kinds of linkages. Victor Shklovsky says that the imagination, he actually uses the word genius, searches out these creative linkages. William S. Burroughs talks about the same thing in The Ticket That Exploded. We want to make meaningful sense out of the things, the information that we're consuming. And even if it's will be very interesting and perhaps moving or somehow emotionally meaningful.
Yeah.
Well, I think that idea of the process that you described there of interpreting things from this kind of morass and everybody pulling their own meaning out of this thing is a lot like how your text is generated with a Markov chain. Right? It's almost a reflection of the way that the thing is created. So you're taking these big standard works from Project Gutenberg, and it's always interesting to me that people are using those kinds of things, because when I see them, sometimes it seems like there's a whole lot of meaning in them, and sometimes it seems just like a word salad. Do you just let all of that stuff come out, or are you selective about the generated bits from your software?
Yeah, that's a great question. It changes from project to project, but I almost always somehow calibrate the results. So I'm not interested in a kind of Cagean chance where anything could possibly happen. I'm interested in anything happening within the parameters that I set. So the trick is, whether this is using a Markov chain or a similar process to generate pitch material or text, I have to figure out a way so that each time I turn the process on, it spits out something that's at least minimally acceptable to me. And that's really where the trick comes in. But to give you an example, this piece I wrote that uses a Markov chain for the text called Inland Ocean, it generated a lot of really crazy texts that I let go. I let them into the piece. For example, my favorite one was, "The finger of God hath ordained the actions of the head of hair." Now that's a very particular kind of word salad, Dave, as you said. But I thought it was, I could use it in this particular piece, but I wouldn't.
Absurd word salad. I like it.
Yes, no, it's very absurd, but it goes along with the I guess the idea or the concept of the piece, which was a conversation between me and the computer, and they were both spoken. One was spoken by me, and one was spoken by the computer. The questions and answers. So, but I do try and edit things so that I have ultimate control over what gets passed, what gets through into the piece from the computer.
Right.
Do you play around with Microsoft Sam?
I've realized we've been playing around a little bit and throwing around the term Markov chain. If you're not familiar with that idea, and John, please correct me if I get this wrong, I've not personally used them in anything that I've made, but basically you start with a body of text that teaches the computer what word to expect next based on what the previous word was. And it'll start with a word, and it will look at all of the instances of that word in the body of text and decide what the most likely next word is based on all of the previous uses of that word. And it'll go one word at a time, or you can do 2 words or 3 words at a time or more to kind of probabilistically create a sentence that will have some of the features of the source text. Is that
That's right. It? That's right. It's a very, actually, really simple way for a system, usually a computer, although it was, developed by this Russian mathematician Markov in the early part of the 20th century, I think, to simulate knowledge of a grammar without actually knowing the grammar. And that grammar could be literary, linguistic. It could be musical, anything that can be divided up into pieces of information, letters, words, notes, chords, sections, anything.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the computer pretends like it understands grammar. So when you put text into it, it has a high likelihood of spitting out a grammatically correct sentence, although oftentimes it's very nonsensical depending on the context. But it's only remixing these little pairs and concatenating them that already exist in the original text.
Right. It's interesting that, because then the system doesn't actually have to understand what it's talking about.
That's exactly right.
It's the John Searle Chinese room thing, where you pass the papers into the room, and the person, if they understand the rules of how to interpret the symbols and respond, they don't actually have to understand what they're doing, as long as they understand the relationship between this symbol and the other symbol.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting generation process, and it strikes me as similar to this Fitterman poem that is the basis for your work, "This Window Makes Me Feel." So maybe you could talk a little bit about that work and where that came from.
Yeah, well, Rob Fitterman teaches creative writing at NYU, and he wrote this piece as the story goes, the story that Rob told me was that he had his friend Kenny Goldsmith, who is the one of the Ubu Web, the really wonderful repository of experimental and outsider art online, ubuweb.com, was working on this project where he had this big Renaissance Italian door that he put a grid over. He overlaid this grid, and he was going to describe every square inch of this door in text, because Kenneth Goldsmith does things like this. His work has to do with lots and lots of text. Sometimes he works with boredom. So he was working on this project, and Rob would check in with him every once in a while and say, "How's the door project going?" And Kenny Goldsmith would say, "Well, not really well. It's sort of taking me a long time, blah, blah, blah." So this went on, and Rob would check in with him. And finally, Rob thought, well, I think I want to write a piece, and instead of making it an objective description of something, I want to make it subjective, and I don't want to use the image of a door. I want to use a window. So he came up with this phrase: "This window makes me feel," a subjective, or a phrase that would elicit subjective results, and put it into Google and started accumulating the results. And when he got them, when he got to the end of the process, he had a 77-page poem in which each sentence began, "This window makes me feel," and then was completed by a Google search result. So that's the text, and I set it for, this was for the original version was for my general's examination in graduate school, for mezzo-soprano, percussion, pianist playing a keyboard as well, and electronic playback. And the mezzo-soprano always sings "This window makes me feel," and on the electronic playback you have the full text read by my friend Trish Navarro.
And that's the recording process you were talking about earlier, just to kind of tie that back together.
That's right.
Okay, cool. So let's actually this piece. This is the recording from the album. So there's more going on in this recording, right?
More going on in terms of...
There's flute in this as well?
Oh, yes. This is the new version that Dewey asked me to make. So Aaron Lesser and Greg Beyer. So it's the original instrumentation plus alto flute.
All right. So this window makes me feel with due east and electronics by the composer John Supko.
Hold on. No, sorry. This window makes me feel like there's this window makes me feel like bad about all the bragging I did to my friends at the time.
All right, so that was an excerpt from "This Window Makes Me Feel" by our guest John Supko. John, thank you for sharing that with us. It went a little longer than we normally play them, but I wanted to make sure we got a sense of all the different parts that were involved in the piece. And so we heard both the sung performance of that text as well as some of those sampled recordings that you'd made. And this is all fixed electronics, right?
That's right.
This is a tape piece, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then the technique, though, of kind of generating the text and putting together strings of information and ceding some control to a computer or a system that a computer is running is something that you've experimented with more recently in your forthcoming album. Or it's not out yet, right? It's
No, November 4th is when it comes out.
okay.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. We were discussing before the show whether we wanted to call it S-Traits or Straits project with Bill Seaman.
Yeah, well, as I said, you can call it S-Straits or Straits, however you like. So that piece is a collaboration, as you said, with my colleague here at Duke, Bill Seaman, who's a media artist, really interesting thinker about and writer and maker of art, and he took the tape part of another piece that I wrote, an early version of this percussion duo Straits that I wrote for the Me and Perkins duo about 4 years ago in 2010, and I threw out that version. So I had this, I rewrote it and I made it an acoustic percussion duo, but I had this 15-minute electronic part that I wasn't doing anything with, and I kind of liked it, so I gave it to Bill, and he chopped it up into these tiny, tiny little fragments, samples that lasted, barely a second. We started adding to that collection of samples, and it grew and grew and grew into a 110-hour database of sound.
110 hours, 1 or 2 seconds at a time, is a lot of little samples.
Right. Well, as it accumulated, there were also samples that lasted a couple of minutes. There were there field recording samples, all sorts of things. So the source material wasn't just this 15 minutes from the electronic track. So after we had this big database of sounds, we thought, rather than going through ourselves and making electronic music based on it, why not hand it over to a system and have a system make the first draft, and then we would finish it. So that's what we did. Bill and I talked about what we wanted, and I system in Maximus P that we're calling now Bearings S Straits, Bearing Straits, which is a pun, obviously, on the Bering Strait, and the fact that it gave birth to Straits, and it basically chose. Bill wrote a text, another text, a recombinant text, where each fragment of the text can be reordered to make a new poem. So the system chooses one of those fragments, which were recorded by Bill, and marries it to a generatively composed first draft of a track that became one of the tracks on our album.
Cool. So, how much control are you enforcing? So we talked a little bit about how you're kind of curating the Markov chains for text earlier. How much control are you balancing between yourself and now another person and a computer system?
When you say control, you mean like?
Who's making the decision, I guess, at the end, what the piece is going to be?
Oh, right. So basically, the way it worked was I would generate a whole bunch of these things in the system, and then give them to Bill, and I would take them, and then we would choose which ones we liked, which drafts, so to speak, we liked, and then work on them. And our rule was that we could change anything, but I think more often than not, we kept what the computer did and just enhanced it. So Bill was sort of the arbiter of what happened in his pieces, and I was I decided what I wanted to keep from the computer's results in my own pieces. And when we put it together, I went through and I sort of tried to get it in a state of kind of consistency across the tracks, because it's a very interesting process to work with another person who has a different aesthetic. I think that we're kind of kindred in a way. But I got it. I produced the album and got it ready for mastering. So, but I respected Bill's pieces, and I tried to make my own pieces. The production of it similar, or at least find a common ground between the two sound worlds.
Okay. So then through that process, did you learn anything about the material that you had put in? That's something that I always think is interesting through these looking at works created by Markov chains. I feel like I'm learning something new about this source material in some way. Like it demonstrates some things that I would not have noticed about the source material. And in this regard, since you're kind of building this source database, I wonder if you learned anything about your process of collecting sounds for it.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. First, I want to say that the system actually doesn't use a Markov chain at all, and not for the text, and not for the actual composition of the music. So it's a totally different process. It's kind of an idiosyncratic process, but it's not a Markov chain process. The principal reason that I use computer systems in my work is actually to learn more about my own aesthetic imagination. So rather than sitting down at the piano or in front of a blank piece of paper, have this tabula rasa just staring back at me and thinking, well, what am I going to do next? I'd rather load a system, upload my imagination or parts of it to a system, and then have it spit things back to me to show me things about what I like, or what I'm interested in. So you hear in the database, you hear things like texts being read or people speaking. There are travel recordings that I made, field recordings on location. There are bits of melodies, things either that I actually wrote, in some cases many years ago. There's some recordings of early pieces that I wrote as a student, a music student. And then there are weird noise things that I generated from opening PDFs as pure data in Audacity. And I discovered that, one little side note, I discovered that if you open a PDF that has a good mixture of blank space, image, and text, it makes the best noise, so digital noise. So I do learn a lot, and that's the principal reason that I work with computers, is I want to learn more about myself, ironically, by handing things off to the computer to show me. It's almost like a mirror in a way.
That's cool. Let's listen to a little bit of this piece, actually, and then we'll continue this discussion.
Okay.
So,
is this Wet Ink we're gonna hear?
No, Wet Ink isn't on the album itself.
Okay.
It's all all computer generated.
Okay.
Okay. So this is from the new album, and this is John Supko and Bill Seaman using some of the processes that we were talking about just today.
And the ice appeared blue.
Oh, you know what?
And the ice appeared blue.
Sorry, I need to put in a mark to cut that because I had the levels down all the way in the recording when I started that.
It's okay.
Drop a marker real quick. All right.
And the ice appeared blue.
Right, that was "And the Ice Appeared Blue" by Bill Seaman and John Supko, our guest today, from their forthcoming album S Traits. We heard in there all of that stuff was originally kind of combined by the computer, and then you went back and selected the parts of it and kind of you curated from all of the many options that you had, and then kind of rearranged the parts yourself, because again, this is still a piece of music. It's not just a science experiment.
That's right. That's right.
And I wonder if you ever think that we could get to a point where that last step isn't necessary.
Well, no, we could.
That human step after the computer step.
We could, but I think it would be a very uninteresting. You know, I often say to students, and I'm really speaking to myself as I usually do when I'm giving a composition lesson, that I think every composer, whether they're being you know, if they're being honest, would say that they'd like a system that would help them write music faster or better or more easily. I think in my little black heart, I have this wish, and I think a lot of people do too. And whenever I've had a system that went in that direction, I was never satisfied with it. There was something lost. There was something inhuman about it, and something cold and distant. So I really think that art is something that humans make for other humans, principally the artist, him or herself first, and then hopefully other people. So if you take out that step, that intervention, at some point, it loses interest, at least for me.
But don't you think we couldn't? Maybe that's just because we're not that great at the computer step yet. Maybe if we got better at the computer step, you wouldn't know the difference. And if you couldn't hear the difference, is there a difference?
That's sort of a philosophical question. I mean, that's sort of to go back to your Chinese room.
Right.
John Searle and Ray Kurzweil have this disagreement about whether or not a computer or artificial intelligence can actually be intelligence, and whether a computer can understand, and what the nature of understanding is. It turns out, at least according to Kurzweil and others, that the processes that go on in our brains are statistical processes that are much like computer processes, except that we're biological organisms. So, it's a debate that I don't think I'm qualified to weigh in on here, but
I would say you are weighing in on it with this music, though.
Yeah.
But I'm doing both. I'm sort of sitting on both sides of the fence in a sense, because I'm using the computer as a collaborator. I'm not suggesting that this computer system is as tasteful or as intelligent or unintelligent as I am. It's just another tool that helps me.
It's computer-assisted composition, just like lots of other people have done.
Yeah. It's just a different form.
Yeah, but whatever happens, we should definitely break down the conversation into a discussion about epistemology.
Okay.
That's good listening. No, just
that's
kidding.
Good radio.
I'm really interested.
Yeah.
Speaking, that's good radio. Speaking of whether or not the human element is involved, I'm interested in the performance that's going to happen live on the 29th with members of the Wet Ink Ensemble.
Yeah. So this is an event to celebrate the release of S-Strait, Pioneer Works. It's being curated by Clock Tower, and it's an event that is basically going to be a live, sort of in the moment experience of what it was like to write the music in a way. So I'll turn Bill is a video artist in addition to a sound artist and a writer, and he's made this wonderful generative video engine, kind of like the generative music engine. And so we're going to have live generative video projected in the space, along with Bearing Straits, the computer system that I made, playing, and then Wet Ink is going to respond, improvise, respond to what they hear in the music. We'll do that for about an hour.
Was having this work be presented in this way with that kind of interaction something you imagined might happen earlier on, or is this a new
No, it was something that evolved because it's not an easy album or project to explain. It takes a while. I feel like I speak in footnotes when I describe it because it's such a convoluted story. But we felt that this was the most appropriate way of introducing this album to an audience, because it has something about the event, the concert event, has some sort of pertinent connection to the way the piece was made, which was hearing a computer compose music and then doing things with it, a human being or human beings doing things with it, which is what's going to happen live rather than the composition process, me, scribbling away in a garret somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Just to remind everyone, this is in Brooklyn on October 29th, correct?
That's right, yeah, at 7:30.
Yes. I'm really interested. I would love to hear what this sounds like, because
Me too.
That you don't know what the players are going to do. And also, I think I have a suggestion for the next step in the evolution of this.
Okay.
Is another.
This always happens. Sam likes to help these people that we have on the show compose music. Here's what.
Okay.
He likes to give
for you from Sam.
He likes to give them a little leg up in their career.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I want you to Dave, to tell me honestly if this didn't cross your mind too. When I was reading about it, I was like, the first thing it says, "Ooh, does it hear what Wet Ink is doing and respond back?"
Oh, right, yeah.
In other words, somehow shape what the program is giving you by taking in what Wet Ink is giving you.
Right. So I've done pieces like that, and it's kind of a pain in the neck, actually.
We're gonna have to haul a mainframe down to Red Hook to get this to work without skipping too.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's something. It's fun. I guess it has something to do with my my limitations as a fake programmer. But it also involves lots of things like extra microphones and pitch tracking, which can be more. It's becoming more reliable, but it's still kind of an annoying prospect. So yes, that's definitely something to do. It just, for this event, it added a layer of complexity that I didn't, that terrified me. So I didn't want to go down that path. But I appreciate the suggestion.
Well, that's like the mad scientist in us all thinking, and we could also, but believe me, there's plenty of levels of complexity there.
I'm glad you bring that up, because I find that, and I had a Twitter conversation with my friend Chris Tigner, who is at graduate school with me, and he's the leader of Slow 6 and Wires Under Tension, and he does a lot. He's much more sophisticated about computers than I am, and we were talking on Twitter about this, and I said to him, at a certain point, when you get the computer you try to get the computer to start developing your material in a way that a human would, the results, you get sort of diminishing returns. So, at least in my experience, so I'm much more interested in the unpredictability of the computer rather than getting the computer to, compose a rondo or, something that has a kind of coherence that a human being would build into a piece, recapitulation or motivic development, that sort of thing. I mean, you can have those things, but they don't manifest themselves in the same way that, say, a retrograde inversion would, or that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, and that's actually, I think the thing you described is almost more of a field of music theory research than creative composition. And it is, I think, a really interesting field of music theory research. Is what bits of information make a Mozart sonata like in a really specific, precise way. I think is
Right.
actually kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I was just, it's a Venn diagram when computers are involved for making art. Where theory and practice collide or overlap. But with Mozart, of course, the genius is how he broke the rules or circumvented the forms in some way, or played a little fast and loose with them, and that's what we really. I think, at least that's what I think we appreciate most. Whereas here, we don't know what the rules are. We're simply taking this information in, and we're doing with it whatever our brains can do.
And if you don't mind a geeky technical question, I'm just curious about how your software is built.
Oh, it's built in MaxMSP, and it's okay. So this is going to sound strange, but my inspiration for this particular for Bering Straits, the structure of it, the behavior of it, came actually from frogs. And specifically this article that was co-written by a cyberneticist named Humberto Maturana called "What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain." I think that's the title. It's about how frogs see. And just very briefly, what it discusses is how a frog can see, the optic nerve of a frog that is comprised of 4 strands, and each strand gives the frog a different part of information. So one strand might be dedicated to the edges of an image, or light, detecting light passing over an object. So each one of these strands is very simple. It's a very simple procedure. It tells the frog that this is dark or light. There's an edge here, or there isn't an edge. But when you put all 4 together, there's a complexity, a complex result that arises. And that's what my inspiration was for this software program. So you have many little machines that do one thing, but when you put them together, the result is unpredictable and quite complex.
That's very cool. I like this story, and thank goodness for JSTOR and things like that.
That's right.
With such articles.
That's right. So I wanted to ask about, you and Bill are the co-directors of the Emergence Lab at Duke.
That's right.
Just tell us about it, because this sounds like a very interesting.
This sounds like a very Sam thing.
This is right. This is my jam right here.
Well, you'll have to come visit. We're just getting up and running. Right now, we've been working in what Bill would call a distributed sense. In other words, we've just recently got a physical location that we're outfitting with. We just purchased a huge 85-inch 4K flat-screen TV, and we have a Genelec surround sound system, and we'll have some IMAX in there for student projects. But basically, the idea is to focus on artworks that are generative, that are not fixed in a particular medium for any length of time. Works that evolve over time. I mean, ultimately, the goal is to make pieces that continue to evolve after their creators are no more. So,
Dave, you might say that. They might say you're looking for pieces that have emergent qualities, right, Dave?
Indeed.
That's right.
Dave makes fun of me.
And I always say home is where the 85-inch 4K television set is.
Or I saw something that said home is where the Wi-Fi connects automatically.
There it is.
That's good.
Yeah.
So we should have you back on, like after this is, after you've got the tile laid down and the sheetrock done and all that stuff in your new space.
Yeah, that's about right. We do need to do a little bit of, we have to knock through a wall and reinforce it. So we're waiting to do that now.
Is there going to be some curriculum tweaking in the music area at Duke to accommodate this fantastic new thing?
Well, this lab actually is not in the music department. It's in a new program called Media Arts and Sciences.
Right.
That is the brainchild of the longtime and now former chair of the art history and visual studies program of Hans von Migro, and it's his idea of the new Bauhaus in a sense, where you have artists, theorists, scientists all working together in close proximity on various projects. So we have a digital archaeology lab that has I haven't tried yet, but I'm dying to. I have to find a way to ask them to let me use it, or at least try it. An Oculus Rift.
Oculus Rift. Okay. Sorry, you broke up a little bit. I thought that's what you said, but I wasn't sure.
Oh yeah, that's what I said.
This is a virtual reality for people that aren't as geeky as the people that are on the panel right now. Oculus Rift, you might want to explain.
I thought you said innocuous Rift.
Oh right. Well, that's the second version, I guess, or the prototype maybe.
Too much.
But it's a head-worn device, immersive 3D environment that you can go on YouTube and find videos of people with it on, and you can see what they see. The reactions, they're quite funny. But it's an immersive 3D head-worn environment. So it's an exciting, it's an exciting place to have our lab and to see what other faculty are doing, and also graduate students. And we're soon, hopefully, going to be granting degrees. So you could come to Duke. Anyone could come to Duke or apply to come and do a PhD in media arts and sciences.
Do you take people that already have DMAs?
I think, well, we haven't gotten to that process yet, but certainly.
A masterclass thing over the summer or something, because I would totally be down with doing something like that.
Yeah, well, we should talk about this.
And I still think that composition majors should have to do something in that building, that room, for a semester.
I agree. I mean, we're teaching. Bill and I are teaching a graduate seminar. We did one last spring, and we're going to do another one this spring in the Emergence Lab. So the PhD composition fellows are going to be all. Well, hopefully they'll take this course, this graduate seminar.
Very nice.
Very exciting. That's very cool.
So, any new projects, anything coming up, any other premieres or big, interesting new projects you're just getting cranked up on?
Well, right now I'm writing an acoustic guitar concerto, an hour-long acoustic guitar concerto for an old friend of mine, Jérémy Jouve, who's a French guitarist. And it's an hour long. It has a very strange instrumentation in the ensemble. The ensemble is string quintet, 2 flutes, 2 clarinets, electric guitar, 2 percussion, countertenor, and generative electronics. So that's going to be premiered in Paris in the spring, in late April or early May. So it'll be immersive. The sound will be quad, and the instrumentalists will surround the audience, and the soloist Jérémy will be in the center of the space.
Say the name of the guitarist one more time.
Jérémy Jouve, like the French poet Pierre-Jean Jouve, Jouve, Jouve.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I will seek out any internet presence for that and put it in the show notes.
Oh, great. Beautiful.
We have a few news items to come up with in just the little bit of time we have left. First of all, later today, this is how newsy and with it we are, as we're recording this show. Later today, Maestro James Levine will be giving his 2,500th performance at the New York Metropolitan Opera.
Wow.
So, Peyton Manning got 509 and 510 last Sunday night. Touchdown passes, but he can't hold a candle to the Maestro.
I think Cal Ripken and Maestro need to get together for a drink. Cal Ripken Jr., that is, and James Levine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Levine.
So,
Levine.
He's yeah. So and of course, because why change anything up for your 2,500th performance? He will be conducting The Marriage of Figaro.
Of course.
That is his jam.
That is his jam, and he is forgiven for it.
We've also got a short friend of the show recap for today, right, Dave?
Oh yeah, We had a couple of interesting things this week that individually we got to see. Yesterday, as we're recording this, we talked about Keith Lay's distance music on the show, and Keith came on and talked about it. If you listen to the show, if you missed it, you should check it out. But if you listen to the show, you remember Keith talking about this crazy project with train horns that he was going to space out on swan paddle boats across the Lake Eola in downtown Orlando, Florida. That happened yesterday. It was a beautiful day. It was a little. So let me put it this way. It was very successful as an event and as a feat of engineering and as a project. I think there were some things about it that were not as successful musically. The train horns totally blew away the brass choirs. Right, you could not hear the brass choirs over the train horns for anything. And also another thing, he mentioned before that the brass choirs were going to be in the tops of buildings on either side of the lake. And I don't know if it was for balance reasons or for like permission or insurance or whatever, but he ended up not putting the brass choirs in the buildings, but rather on the edge of the lake. Mm-hmm. Now there were a bunch of people there that got to hear it, and that was very cool. And in fact, I even met a SoundNotion listener who found out the project through listening to that episode and went to check it out. So thanks for saying hi. And I think it was a really cool project. I think probably it could have benefited from a little bit more experimentation during the process, but what are you going to do? It costs them, I don't know how much money to fill those tanks for the air horns every time.
Yeah.
And not to mention all the probably 40 or 50 people involved to put everything together in a very public park where there is an event that goes on almost every weekend anyway.
Well, my question is, were the train horns satisfyingly loud as expected?
They were super loud. It was pretty cool. And the parts of it, there were some parts, especially in the third movement, that were very successful musically that I really dug. Some other parts of it were problematic just because I couldn't hear the brass choirs hardly at all.
Yeah, John, the piece spaces out these train horns like the kind that make a "here comes the train" noise, right? So they,
right.
for public safety reasons, they're super, super excruciatingly loud.
Yeah.
And they're all playing different pitches spaced out over a huge amount of area.
In Durham, we have beautiful train whistles that go past regularly. I keep wanting to but I think sometime in the future. Although this piece, I don't know the piece, but it reminds me of Alvin Curran's piece for ship horns. I forget the name of it, but
yeah, I've heard about this.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Just ocean liners in a port. It has to be done in a port where you have like 20 ocean liners and they're all blowing their horns at different times.
I think this was very cool. It's all radio controlled and very precise, and the boats were positioned with GPS so that you would get a very specific rhythm.
Oh, that's fantastic!
On where you were standing around the lake.
Uh-huh.
And it was really cool.
Yeah.
But there were some other things that I think didn't work as well as Keith had hoped they might work. And like I said, he didn't have the opportunity to try stuff out ever.
Sure, yeah.
This was his tryout of a lot of these ideas. But it was a really cool experience, and congratulations to Keith and to everybody who was involved because it was really, really exciting.
So in addition to distance music going off, we had an actual man on the street.
Indeed, in the hall.
For the Klinghoffer madness. So
on the street and in the hall. Yes.
Give us the lowdown.
And
Patrick.
not punched in either of those places, as I recall.
I think it's no secret that there has been a lot of controversy in the media coming up to these Klinghoffer performances at the Met.
No, it's gone to the mainstream media, it's on the TV news.
Yeah, TV news, Time.
Hypothetical Steve Ducey.
Yeah. So Monday last week, October 20th, was the opening night performance of The Death of Klinghoffer at the Met. This was their debut, the debut of that opera at the company, and it was met with a lot of criticism. There was Rudy Giuliani spoke at the protest outside. The opening night of the Met on September 22nd featured former Governor George Pataki. There were a number of other folks, politicians there representing their constituencies, whatever it might be. To me, it looked kind of borderline farcical from where I was standing and listening.
You said you felt a little bit on edge just because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think everyone felt that way. After I didn't spend much time outside at the protest, but going in, the lights go down, and everyone starts to be quiet. There's a little bit of rumbling. I think there was some guy who said, get your hands off my wife or something in the back. I don't know if they were being escorted out because they thought that they were going to be disruptive. But at that moment, you could just feel the tension in the room. You thought it might break. Like, was anything going to happen? Fortunately, it did not. There was some heckling. During the performance, some guy kept screaming, "The murder of Klinghoffer will never be forgiven," until he was ejected, and I believe arrested after that. There were a few other people who said things mid-performance, mid-aria, between aria. It was really, and after experiencing all of that, I have to stand back, and say, like, should there be a concern about this? However, is it anti-Semitic? I can honestly, now that I've seen a production live, I've listened to the music, I've read the libretto, I've seen the movie, like, it is clear to me, clearly not. And I can't put myself in the position to see how other people see it like that. Needless to say, though, there was a lot of support that came out for all of the artists who participated, for John Adams. I think the performance was a tremendous success. There was a really long standing ovation afterwards. After the performance, it felt really good. Everyone I talked to said, it was really fantastic.
Well, the most important thing to take away is it's over and we don't have to talk about it anymore.
Yeah. Yes.
So, go ahead, Patrick.
No, I was just to wrap up. I think this is a moment that never happens in classical music. It never ever happens. I'm not sure that I am ever going to meet this sort of, press, coverage, or the style of press coverage, or public awareness about a classical music event, for the next, I don't know, couple decades or so, I guess.
Yeah, well, we'll see. It's becoming a thing for people to use more and more contemporary subject matter, and they've kept it fairly light, like Anna Nicole, but they don't have to, and there's plenty of controversial things going on in the world, So
we were talking before the show about Ted Hearn premiering his Chelsea Manning oratorio this week.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't really know anything about it. I haven't heard any of it, but I would be really interested to.
Yeah, it's certainly there's a lot of room for a composer or librettist or both taking just that subject matter to make a very strong statement of some kind if they want. And who knows whether they do or not. Hopefully we'll find out.
That piece by Ted Hearn is called The Source, just so everyone knows.
Oh, that makes sense. Other news, this is really for sax nerds, but I'm a sax nerd, and we are known affiliates of sax nerds here on the show. I had never even heard of the guy's name until today, to be honest, but every sax player, at least past a certain age, knows the solo from Baker Street.
I've no idea what Baker Street is.
If you heard it, you'd know it if you heard it. It's got one of the most famous sax solos ever. And, as a teenager, I learned how to play it, and probably, 75% of all sax players who have any interest in playing pop music at all learned this sax solo at some point. His name is Raphael Ravenscroft. Played the famous alto sax solo on Baker Street. He passed away. And a side note, if you look at the picture on the story I'm going to post, tell me he does not look just like, what's his name? Julia Roberts' brother.
Kenneth Roberts.
No, not Kenneth. Anyway, he looks just like the guy. And sadly, we've got a lot of obit news. We forgot to mention it last week, but 2 weeks ago, Alan Fort, the famous music theorist, particularly known, although he worked on all kinds of things, to my mind, particularly known for post-tonal analysis stuff.
Right.
We've all looked up
He
the
wrote
quote.
the book on the structure of atonal music, and he called it the structure of atonal music.
And if you've ever heard the word fort number but didn't know the guy's name, that's the guy.
That's the fort.
That's the fort number we're talking about. He lived a nice long life, but he will be missed. And sadly, taken at a pretty young age, composer from Michigan, Stephen Paulus, passed away. Minnesota, that's what I meant to say. I knew it started with an M.
Apparently, I didn't know Stephen
Paulus was the founder of the Composers Forum. I mean, he was really kind of one of the guys that said, hey, we make a lot of good stuff here, and we should support one another and not just make stuff in our own little silos. I mean, he made great music. He was a wonderful composer, but he also, I think, served the community in a really wonderful way, and I hope that he will be remembered for both of those things equally.
I think he will. Everyone I've spoken to about Stephen Paulus, so I didn't know him, but said he was an incredibly nice guy, and had a lot of life to him, and as we know, incredibly prolific composer. Had his own publishing company, so it's too bad, but yeah, he will be missed.
Actually, something I forgot to put in the list, Dave, and we can end on some good news. I had put it in the doc and then forgot to put it in the rundown. The League of American Orchestras and New Music USA announced 12 new Music Alive residencies, or Music Alive residencies, for the 2014 to 2016 season, which is how they work this thing.
Well, and New Music USA, we should point out, is one of the organizations that resulted from the kind of merger and redivision of the Composers Forum and the American
Exactly.
Meet the Composer,
American Composers Forum, and whatever ACF was.
American Music Center.
American Music Center. Thank you.
We actually covered this the last time they announced. And I think I read this somewhere, but I think there are more this time around. I could be wrong about that, but there are 12 this time. And I'm going to put a link to the New Music Box story that covers it. But a friend of the show, Missy Mazzoli, is one of them. It pairs composers with orchestras. So the orchestras and the composers each separately apply, and then they get paired up by the judges and the committee or whatever. And Missy Mazzoli is paired with the Boulder Philharmonic Orchestra. So anxious to hear what they get. What comes from all of these pairings.
Nice. This is a good list. It's a good list. Mm-hmm. We'll check it out. I love that they're mostly regional orchestras. That's exciting.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. So that is going to do it for this week's episode of SoundNotion. Thank you, John, for spending your morning with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was really a delight.
If anybody wants to catch you and follow what you're up to, where should they go to do that?
Well, I have a website, which is my name, johnsupko.com. I'm on Twitter at Supko, and I'm also on SoundCloud.
Excellent. So we will have links to those places and more, and all of the many things that we talked about with John and the stories that we talked about after the interview section. Those will all be on our site at soundnotion.tv/SN. And if you would like to continue our conversation, first of all, if you'd like to participate in our conversations live, you can do that at live.soundnotion.tv. We start the show around 11 a.m. Eastern Time on Sunday mornings. And if you did a little mental arithmetic right there in California, it's decided that 8 a.m. is very early and not a time that frankly exists for you on Sunday morning. We totally understand, and that's why we post all of our stuff for on demand. And you can still participate in the conversation, though. You can leave a comment on our site. You can find us on Twitter or on Facebook, or you can subscribe and leave a comment on YouTube. We're, as a group on Twitter, we're at SoundNotion. I'm at Dave McDowell. Sam is at Housegoy. Patrick is at Vox Shibuya. And as John mentioned, he is at Supko on Twitter. So please take a look, follow those things, and continue these conversations with us in those places after the fact. You can subscribe to this show and all our shows in the iTunes Store or wherever finer podcasts are aggregated. Leave us a comment, write a review. That helps people to find us. If you'd like to support us, that's the best way to do it, is to help people find our shows. If you'd like to support us more directly, you can use the Amazon affiliate links on our site. The next time you're just buying a random whatever gizmo from Amazon, if you find it through the little search box on our site, we get a commission for sending you there, and that helps us out a lot. Thank you to those who have done that. If you'd like to help us out even more directly than that, there are PayPal donation links on the site as well. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo. Thank you so much for being with us, and we will see you back next week.